Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getitInWriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is David Mash. He is a musician, educator, visionary, futurist. Your main background for many, many years was by association with Berklee College.
Yes. I worked at Berklee College of Music for 41 years, first as a faculty member, and then I worked my way up through the ranks, first by starting the music synthesis program, which is now called Electronic Production and Design, and then I was Assistant Dean of Curriculum for Academic Technology, and then Vice President for Technology, and then Senior Vice President for Innovation, Strategy, and Technology. Great titles.
Really great titles. Long.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite one was when I was Assistant Dean of Curriculum for Academic Technology, because when I was Berklee's Assistant Dean of Curriculum for Academic Technology, the acronym was BAD CAT.
Bad Cat. Nice. So with all these badass and bad cat titles that you had, the course that you took Berklee on, and I don't mean you single-handedly, of course, but you were obviously, no pun intended here, instrumental in bringing the school from arguably a sleepy, private school of music of, no question, high repute, to an institution on many other levels. Was this a vision of yours all along, or is this just something you kind of grabbed onto and rode like a bull?
No, I wouldn't say it was a vision that I had from the beginning. I think like many people, I grew up playing music as a kid and then playing in bands in my teens and 20s, and I went to Berklee thinking I was going to go for a semester to get my chops up and then go on the road and be a rock star.
Isn't that everybody's plan?
I think so. And so, I went there for, literally, I thought I was going for one semester. I went in January thinking I'll go home in June and I'll just pick up some hot licks from all the teachers and students there. And what happened was like what happens to most students that come to Berklee, who were big fishes in their little ponds before they came. I was just astounded by the amount of talent around me and how much I needed to learn, so that I just kind of threw myself into it. And then in my senior year, they asked me to teach, so I started teaching. And then when I graduated, I started teaching full time, and one thing led to another.
Were you drawn to teaching?
Yes, I actually started teaching when I was 15, and by the time I was 16 and could drive, I had a private practice of 30 students a week.
Wow. How entrepreneurial of you for 16 years old.
Yeah. And so, I was teaching every day after school, and then
Guitar lessons?
Guitar lessons,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then, playing in bands on the weekends, and just, having a great time. And so I thought, well, I'll go pick up some more. So then when Berklee asked me to teach, I was excited and honored. And then that allowed me to branch out into, other, subject matters. And instead of just teaching guitar, I taught ear training and harmony and theory, and then arranging, jazz composition, and eventually electronic music. And it was that experience of starting the music synthesis department that kind of flicked the switch in my mind. And then I thought, okay, this is really something that I can do. I can really, by starting a new major at Berklee, I can affect a lot more students than I could just as a single teacher. Once I started the department, and of course, with the advent of MIDI and computers, and I got drawn into the whole computer and software world, and it occurred to me that as important as the computer was for helping you produce music, it could be an incredible tool to help you learn music. And so that really sparked my interest, and I went to the president with a dream, basically, to change Berklee. I came to him and I basically said, I want to network the campus. I want to get computers in all the students' hands and really change the way we teach. And he, was interested, but he didn't quite get it. So I wrote a short story. I went back to my house and I wrote a story about the teachers and the students and what they did. So, it started out with an actual teacher at Berklee, Pat Pattison, who was a songwriting teacher, and how he was preparing for his class using the internet, and how we created a place for the students in his class to put their work, and then created a discussion board. Now, this was in 1990, no, this was actually in 1989.
So personal computers were still fairly new, and there were a lot of different platforms.
Yes, and the World Wide Web didn't exist. The
Right.
internet was a bunch of discussion boards and
Usenet and
exactly.
the Well, CompuServe, things like that. Yeah.
But anyways, I wrote this story about how everybody would work, and the president read it, and he called me in and he said, when Berklee started, what differentiated it from every other place was what we taught. That is, Berklee started as a contemporary music school teaching about jazz, which was the contemporary music of the time in 1945. And so Berklee was trying to differentiate itself from all the classical institutions and conservatories by what they taught. And he said, this might be an opportunity to differentiate Berklee from all the other institutions by how we teach. And he said, I really like this idea, and yes, let's get you started. So first thing I did was just create a local area network around the campus, small one to do proof of concept. And then I started by digitizing the library. So at that time, this was by now 1989, they were still using a card catalog, literally the drawers with cards in them.
Sure.
And so the first thing we did was to create a database and transfer all that information. And then we had the listening part of the library was all 7-inch reel-to-reels.
Well, that's fun.
Well, and by 1989, they were dying and there was no replacements for them. So we got started with that. And then by 1994, with the advent of the web, my thinking, got much bigger in terms of the whole idea of a networked campus and a networked environment for learning where students can share with each other, share with their teachers, teachers could share with their other teachers. And we had actually started in the early 90s with doing distance master classes using multiple ISDN lines and video teleconference equipment.
Oh, wow.
And we had a relationship with Dolby Labs in LA. And so we would have alumni of ours come to Dolby Labs in LA. We leased 8 ISDN lines and we would do video master classes. So we had like Alf Clausen and we had Eric Marienthal and Peter Erskine and just bunches of people who would come to Berklee via ISDN lines long before Zoom.
Sure.
But the idea was we could bring the greatest talent who couldn't, ordinarily come full-time and be a teacher at Berklee, but they could share their wisdom and expertise and experience with students over the distance.
Were the logistics more difficult at that point? I'm sure they were.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And very expensive.
Right.
But Lee Burke, who was president at the time, Lee Elliott Burke, after whom the college is named,
Right.
Berklee, he was really a visionary, and he while he personally couldn't have envisioned that, he saw right away the wisdom of investing. And also, we had long talks about the advantage of waiting versus the advantage of jumping in and being first, on the
Leading edge, yeah.
that certainly other colleges could later on catch up because the technology would get less expensive and there'd be more proof of concepts and things like that.
Of course.
But for me, the most important thing were the humans, especially the faculty, and the faculty accepting these new technologies and these new ways of thinking about teaching and learning. That will take other institutions a long time to catch up. And so, I worked really, because I had been a department chair and an assistant dean, I was, well known in the faculty, and also they knew me as a musician. So it was easier to herd the cats, as they say, than if I had been just an academic from the outside with these, wacky ideas about using technology. And then, we started thinking about, the college's web presence and the whole idea of well, we're generating all this content for use on campus. Why not also make it available to those who couldn't come to campus? So in 2001, we launched the online school, and we've been talking about it for a few years and thinking about how to do it. And when I became assistant dean of curriculum, one of the things that the college gave me as one of my projects was Berklee Press, which at that time was fairly dormant. It was distributed by Hal Leonard, but new books hadn't been written in dozens of years. And just by chance, Dave Cusack, who had been the founder of Passport Designs, had left the company. It was it was on the way out, and he was coming to live in Boston because his wife was going to school at BU, and so he called me and said, "Hey, is there anything that I might do, even as a consultant for Berklee?"
And you said your timing is impeccable.
And I said, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm taking over the press, and you could really be helpful to me," because I knew one of the things that he had been doing with Passport Designs was trying to do a digital publishing company. So we hired Dave Cusack, and Dave Cusack ran the press while we were thinking about the online school and the rest of the projects of wiring the campus and such. And then it made total sense to let Dave take over the school. So he's the founder of the school with the team that I led surrounding
The online school.
Yeah. And then we hired Debbie Cavalier to run the press. Debbie had been with Warner Brothers, and in fact I had done 5 books for her. And she's a Berklee alum. And now she's Senior Vice President for Online Learning at Berklee. So
You seem to have a bit of a knack for putting together teams.
The way I approached all of these things, because really what all of this was just dreaming and big project management. But no one person can do those things, and everything that has to be done. So finding the right people, connecting the right people together into teams, and then supporting them was what I learned how to do. It's kind of like being a band director, or
Yes.
So the project design was like composition. So for me, it was like, well, I know I'm starting here and I want to get there, and I have to go through a couple of transpositions and modulations, and I'll get there. And then
Problem solving.
yeah, and then the actual management of it is like conducting. You get all the right people together and you conduct them to make a great piece.
And you get them to do what they do best as part of an ensemble.
So when Lee Burke announced his retirement in 2005, he retired in 2006. By that time, we were up and running. The school had been up for a couple of years. It was really doing very well. And the online school was up and running. The on-campus school was doing very well. And then Roger Brown came in as the first president of Berklee, whose last name wasn't Burke. And Roger was an amazing force. I shouldn't say was, it's not part of, he's no longer president, he left a couple of years ago, but, and he immediately saw bigger ideas and then tapped me to help him with all these major projects, which included, you know, expanding to have a campus in Spain and merging with the Boston Conservatory and building a campus in New York City at the old power station. And that was one of the last things that I was working on when I retired. I just finished the merger, and I had just done the 10-year vision plan for the college, and one of the trustees had an opportunity to purchase that property and donated the studio component to us. And then we were able to get money from New York City to renovate it and bring it back to its glory. And
which was no mean feat.
Yeah. Stephen Weber, who's the person who's running that campus, did an amazing job in getting that started. And so there, Berkeley had lots of great, talented people, and at first tolerant and then excited presidents that allowed me and gave me opportunities to make contributions and to impact more and more students through the process.
One thing that strikes me about the way that you pursued this, which I really love, is that you were always very conscious of the human element. This is, first of all, education in itself is such an interaction amongst people. And, I'm sure you know this, and most people who have taught do, that you learn a hell of a lot more by teaching than any other way. And I think there's a relationship between people who teach and people who learn that literally does go both ways, but also there is an understanding of the nature of the creative process between human beings that, first of all, obviously it's necessary for a music school because you are creating, but in order to facilitate that expansion plan that well, I guess it didn't all come at once, but as these expansion plans began to take shape, a lot of it had to do with human interaction.
I think it's all about human interaction. And like you say, teaching and learning are two sides of the same process.
Yeah.
And creativity, especially when the teaching and learning is about the creative process, and creativity is something that no one person does. We all do it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's ever played in a band knows that the joint creativity that happens, especially in the improvising bands, in the moment, is the most exciting.
No question.
And no one person is ever the focus. It's always the music that's the focus. And here, the focus was learning and teaching and that process. And so, yeah, it's all about human interaction. It's all about working together. It's hard for me even though we're talking about this, to take credit for all the things that I helped to instigate and nurture at Berklee, because there were so many people who made it happen.
Of course. You were, as you say, herding cats.
Yeah, and I hoped, at my best, inspiring people to think differently and to think creatively and then to build great things. Certainly, when we started thinking about the online school, which was, the first. I mean, Berklee was definitely the first online school for music, and certainly the first to offer online degrees in music. And, I think the idea came out of a brainstorming session of, 7 or 8 people, and we investigated lots of different avenues before we got to where it went to. And, so I think anybody taking credit for it would be, misleading. We all worked
Sure.
towards making it happen, and it wouldn't have happened without Lee Burke. It wouldn't have happened without Gary Burton. It wouldn't have happened without Dave Kusek. I'd like to think it wouldn't have happened without Dave Mash, but who knows? Maybe it would have.
I think another interesting aspect to bring up here is the relationship to technology, because for many of us, and this is obviously true of you in this particular situation, the technology was developing at the time. The technology, however, has always been, for most of us, a tool with which to create art. And I love the fact that you always, not you, but you collectively, always had the focus of that role of the technology. A lot of times we get lost in the technology. People talk about having to have this particular piece of gear or whatever it is, and I think it's so much more important to recognize that the technology is in service to the art.
Absolutely. And, I think I personally started using technology to make music in the 70s, which was early. Not pioneering, but, early adopters.
Bleeding edge, yes. Mm-hmm.
And in those days, it was lacking a lot.
Yes, it was.
And so when I started the music synthesis department, there was not a lot of good information out there. There was a lot of information, but not well. A, not all correct technically,
yes.
And B, not all useful. We had to make decisions about what to teach and then how to teach it.
There were also a lot of divergent camps at that point. You had your Mac users, your Windows people. Oh, actually, was it even Windows yet? It was DOS. Yeah. You had Atari and Amiga and various other flavors, and everyone had their own little, almost insular worlds in that sense.
Yeah, and I kind of fell into the Mac early, and I think the Mac and MIDI enabled so much for me as a musician, but I still laugh because when I started building these labs of Mac computers and all these synthesizers, and the board of trustees was like scratching their heads saying, well, Apple is going to go out of business in a year or two, so what are you going to do? And I every year I had to have a backup plan for what would happen if Apple went out of business. Of course, it's 40 years later now.
Yeah, we think they're doing okay now.
Yeah, not only did they not go out of business, but and I was very fortunate to be invited by Apple in late '86, early '87 to participate in that video that they did, the Macintosh MIDI and music, the open door.
I remember that. Yeah.
And when they came out to film, it was we were doing stuff that just hadn't been done before, and of course I was fortunate to be among a star-studded cast, and then that formed a relationship between me and Apple directly, and then I became an Apple master in the '90s, but yeah, so there was, I was guilty at first. We were teaching how to use the technology, and then we were teaching the technology as a tool to make music and create with, and then it became much more clear to me the nature of it as a tool for a lot of things, creating music, learning music, teaching music, collaborating. So yeah, you're right. It's very important to see all these things in the service of the greater good and the greater applications of all these things.
Well, and I mean, you were around for the beginnings of MIDI as a protocol, and you can very distinctly remember, I'm sure, all of the fits and starts there. But ultimately, again, it was for the good of everyone that people agreed to come to a consensus and create a standard. And that, I think, really changed the face of a lot of what we do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a performing musician in the late '70s, early '80s, using synthesizers that didn't talk to one another. So you had to have lots of them,
Yep.
which were very expensive and heavy and large to move.
And didn't stay in tune well. And
Yeah, don't get me started. um, but but when MIDI came into play, I mean, and there was the Oberheim system, there was the Roland DCB, and
yeah,
digital connection bus, and all of those ideas led to MIDI, and MIDI, of course, led to so many opportunities for everybody in the industry and artists, and then it became a bad name, bad word for a while.
oh, because of techno.
Well, I think because amongst musicians, because that whole general MIDI thing, where everybody had the same sound set,
Yes.
and music was very stiff and not musical, and so like anything, it takes artists to turn the technology into
Yes.
instruments, and eventually we got there, and now it's ubiquitous.
We're about to celebrate the 40th anniversary of MIDI, in fact.
And I remember one of my first consulting jobs in the industry was with Kurzweil, and an engineer named Chris Jans, who was assigned the task of implementing MIDI on the Kurzweil 250. And basically, he contacted me, and because at Berklee we had a ton of gear, I would go over in the evenings and we would just test all the different gear, and we found all these incompatibilities and different interpretations of modes and such, and the MIDI modes, and it was a fascinating time to try to figure out the path between the spec and what really it evolved into.
Yes. And of course, instruments were evolving at the same time. Synthesis was evolving at the same time. And
technology was evolving at the same time. And it's been a very exciting time. I mean, I feel like I was in the right place at the right time and got to have opportunities that were incredibly rewarding and enriching for me in many ways, both as an educator and a leader, but also as an artist. Every day I'm using all the gear here to explore new ways of making sound and expressing myself, and I'm always looking for not the shiny new object, but the thing that I'm trying to find this way of doing this. What is it that I can get to do that? And sometimes it means calling manufacturers and helping design something.
Well, what's funny about that is when all this technology was new, we had so many limitations, and those limitations made us try different things. And, what happens if I use this for that or try this? It's a what if kind of proposition. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were facing all these limitations. Now, it's almost the opposite. We almost have unlimited choices, and that can, of course, be paralyzing, but it can also, as you say, lead you down a different path of creativity.
Yeah, I mean, I think of, as an instrumentalist, you'll see I've got a bunch of acoustic instruments here. As an instrumentalist, the instrument is a kind of a portal into sound, right? For me, it's not that I am playing the instrument to make sound. It's a way of me exploring the ability to make sound. And so when you work with technology, the edges of the portal get wider and wider. And so when things get wider and wider, and there are more and more possibilities, creativity is all about narrowing the possibilities and making choices.
Yes.
And
committing to those choices.
yeah, and going down the path, and it's exciting to, almost every day, sometimes twice or three times a day, there are new products that come up on the screen.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That offer you yet another path to a different direction, and it's just exciting times.
No kidding. So you quote unquote retired a few years ago. And by retired, I assume we mean just that you're not working at Berklee anymore. Other than that, I don't see that you've slowed down or given up music, not that anyone could.
I was just talking with a colleague today. We were trying to, a former colleague from Berklee, and it's going on 6 years now since I retired.
Ooh.
And
seems like only yesterday.
We were just trying to find a time to chat, and she said, "Geez, you're busier than I am. You're supposed to be retired." And I said, "I'm just as busy as I always was, except now I'm only doing things that I want to do."
Uh-huh.
So it's a fortunate position to be in, and yes, I'm trying to give back to the to the world of electronic music, which was so good to me by being involved with the Bob Moog Foundation and also the Alan R. Perlman Foundation. Both those people, Bob Moog and Alan Perlman, were close personal friends and mentors, colleagues, and both of them created instruments that changed my life. And I'm honored to be working with those organizations to bring that work and that excitement about creativity and engineering and design to another generation of young people. And so yeah, keeping busy. That's for sure.
Yeah. And education is still at the heart of it.
Yeah, I think so. Education, creativity, music making. For me, it's hard to draw boundaries because for me, I've been involved in all those things for so long that they all feel like naturally intertwined.
Well, let me ask you, because there have been so many changes over this period of time that you've been working as a musician, as someone involved in technology, as an educator. What's the constant?
Human beings and music and creativity are all constants.
Has the creative process changed?
The process has changed, but creativity remains at the heart of everything. And none of us can really identify where it comes from.
Which is what's so beautiful about it.
You can talk about spirituality or religion or whatever. Those people who are creative understand that the ideas come from someplace.
Right.
And they come through us. And hopefully in that process we add our own personal touch to it. Makes it uniquely, our contribution. But it's all a continuum, I think. And the technology, it's, I think Bob Moog once said that musicians have always used the latest technology in instruments in order to make their art. And when you think about the development of musical instruments and how many instruments have evolved since we started banging on drums and singing, that all sorts of technologies were in that lineage, from metallurgy and all when you think about valves in brass instruments and springs and pads and things on woodwind instruments and then
Mallets
mallets
and
and hammers, pianos, hammers and actions and all the things that go into. I mean, these are pretty complicated mechanical
Oh, sure.
technologies.
Sure.
So now we're talking about bits and bytes mostly, and voltage and such. But it's I think musicians are always searching for that sound that they're hearing and need to create, and they find different tools to use to create.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the technology will continue to evolve, and we'll find things that we never dreamed were possible. But they are all supposed to serve in the art, right? They're just tools, as you said.
Ultimately, yeah. But you've managed to adapt and evolve with them, which I think is part of being an artist too,
Yeah, and, as I've gotten older, I think the one thing that keeps me feeling young is that search and looking and learning new things every day, and constantly trying to find new things, new ways of expression.
I like that. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to?
No, I think we've just rambled longer than anybody would want to listen to.
That's what I love about doing this show, the opportunity to do just that.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to ramble on and talk about some interesting opportunities I've had.
You have had a great many, and you've given back quite a bit too.
Try.
David Mash, thank you for being my guest.
Thank you, Daniel.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.